Welcome everyone to our session. We're going to get started since we're on such a very tight time track. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our next speakers for a presentation called Know Your Meme, Sensory Memetics and Audience Engagement. Please welcome to the stage Allison Gutkowski, Senior Director, Global Research at HCD Research, and Michelle Niedziela, Ph.D. and VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Making sure you guys can hear me. My name's Michelle Niedziela, and I am a little bit of an outsider to this meeting. We're a little bit different at HCD. We come actually from consumer research and product research. A big conversation that happens quite often with our clients is really about how often the R&D and the marketing sides are very siloed from one another when in fact they could inform each other a lot more. And so a lot of what we've been doing is kind of hand-holding and bridging that gap to make sure that the product meets the promise. And we want to talk about how that idea is really coming to fruition as the world has been changing. And you guys probably know more than I do about this very issue. Now, if you're interested in what we're talking about and you want to know more, we also have a podcast, as everybody does. But you can visit our website and find out more about us at hcdi.net. Or reach out to us individually. We're on LinkedIn, or you can email us. So this is a blank screen, but it's because I want to tell you a little bit of story about a conversation I had with one of my colleagues. And it was I guess a little over a year and a half ago, where we were talking about some events that had just happened. It was the Olympics and the Super Bowl. And so the Olympics, did anybody watch it? Yeah. Did you watch it live? Did you see a lot of information about it on social media? Now, the Super Bowl, meaning the one that had all the 90s R&B and rap, like how many of you saw information about that on social media? And so in this conversation, we were kind of talking about, well, what happened there? Why were we so much more aware of what was going on with the Super Bowl than we were with the Olympics? And it kind of turned out she had a friend that was working with the Olympics in their marketing, and they were talking about how most of it was being run by lawyers who were trying to shut down any communication that was happening because they really wanted to drive people to actually watch live. Now, this seemed to be exactly the opposite of what was going on in the Super Bowl, where it almost seemed like it was encouraged to do as many, social media conversations as possible that could possibly happen. So if you think about what you actually saw socially that you heard from other friends, et cetera, and maybe it's because I'm of a certain age, but this really spoke to me, this whole idea of, you know what, maybe the Super Bowl is for me. And that became a really interesting topic of conversation between my colleague and I. Well, why did I feel that the Super Bowl was for me and I didn't feel like the Olympics was for me? And it was very targeted towards me, I think, because it was definitely playing to like the Gen X idea that, this was my era. This was like the music that I was really into. The idea that, if you've heard of these people or if you're excited for the halftime show, then maybe it's time to get a colonoscopy, right? But it was really funny and everybody was sharing it and they were really making it their own. And kind of diving a little bit more into this, really came up with the idea of studying the theory of memetics. Like, why would somebody want to share that? Why does someone want to propagate a message? How does something become viral? And that's something that's a conversation that we have with clients quite often, where someone will come to us and say, how do we make the next Starbucks unicorn? Like, how are we going to get people to share this on Instagram and on TikTok? Like, what makes people want to propagate and become the source and the host of some sort of message? And a lot of it is that they internalize it and they make it their own. Now, my background is I have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. So again, not really coming from an advertising or marketing world. And we use a lot of psychological and neuroscience theories to better understand how consumers are making their decisions. What is driving people to behave in one way versus another? And so this really became an interesting topic for us to really explore and really thinking again, well, what are the actual behaviors and what's driving those behaviors? So when people are watching TV, and an ad comes up, it really reminded me a lot of what happened maybe back in the early 2000s when banner ads existed and we all really learned how to ignore them, right? So now when ads come on the TV, maybe they are playing and things are being read that, the ad is in fact on and it's on, the TV is on, like we just saw from the previous talk. But people have now picked up their phone and they're scrolling through Facebook or scrolling on TikTok or whatever it might be. So they're not even really watching. And she has her remote in her hand. So you've all seen this. And advertising seems to have taken, a turn to really try to engage as much as possible, because engagement, of course, is like one of the most important things. But in order to do that, okay, in order to do that, they've really tried to, like, if you have this situation where people are learning very quickly on how to ignore, like they did with banner ads on websites, now they're in a situation where they're learning again to just, an ad comes up, well, I'm just going to do something else until it's over. Or, how long does it take until I can do skip ad, right? Um, I think that this learning to ignore cycle has gotten faster and faster, like much faster than it did back then. And so the type of content that people are seeing is becoming, very kind of extreme and really trying to, like, um, grab people, right, and be the most engaging and be the most novel. And there does seem to be um, something there about trying to come up with the newest creative idea, which is really fun and exciting because we've seen some really great stuff. But then this question of sort of authenticity comes up, where when people see that something is sponsored, are they more likely to not trust it? Is it no longer authentic, right? And some of it has been very creative and very engaging, but then, how far can that go? So we saw in the Super Bowl ad that happened that, like, everybody was talking about, but you can't do this again, right? Now it's been done. So, like, what's the next thing? So what's the future proofing that can actually happen? And for us, the way we kind of operate in this world is really thinking, let's take a step back and think about how humans think and how they behave and what drives their behaviors, and kind of boil things down to this sort of understanding on how that can be incorporated into, again, it's getting very theoretical here, but thinking about memetics and how they can be the hosts that are going to propagate a message themselves. Because I think playing this game of the next newest creative idea is really chasing after a white rabbit, right? So thinking about, like, how people incorporate things into their lives, into their habits, becoming part of their lifestyle, can really be about communicating something that is meaningful to them. So again, harping back to what was going on with the Super Bowl, why did I think that this was more for me? Like, it really spoke to me and made me want to participate and propagate to people I knew, right? Share the message. So how can brands communicate with consumers on this level where people feel like there is a level of authenticity, which honestly is a very difficult concept to measure? How can we future proof our marketing plans in this way? So with people that are really communicating entirely with, secondary devices other than their, TV, with brands, and I really do think this is like communication with a brand, you really have to speak to the actual experience that people are having. And that's where I think you start to have a need to bridge that gap between these siloed areas of R&D and marketing, because a lot of really rich information is going on in understanding how consumers interact with products in R&D. Now, I come from a sensory world, meaning it's all been about taste and smell and understanding how these cues that go on within a product experience drive behavior. What makes you want to repurchase a product? What makes you want to share that product? What drives your attention to that product? What makes you believe, like, it gives you that reason to believe that the product is working the way it's supposed to. And a lot of that research actually comes from what we call sensory profiling. And when you do something like sensory profiling, it's very much, what you're imagining with taste tests. However, what they're often doing is understanding, if we're talking about food, for example, the appearance of the food, the aroma of the food, the flavor, the oral texture of it. Imagine if you're, like, biting into a candy bar. There's all sorts of sensory factors that go into that experience, and they become a signature, right? So the difference between a Kit Kat and a Snickers, right? It might smell different. It certainly looks different. The mouthfeel is different. The taste is different. And so you have signature properties of these products that really need to all come together in what we call brand harmony. So all these different pieces do have to feed together. And the story I really like to give is, like, when you buy shampoo, what do? You walk down the aisle, you crack open the lid and you sniff it, right? So let's say you're walking in the shampoo aisle, you grab a bottle, it's green, it's got pictures of fruit on it, it's called Fructis. You pop open the lid and it smells like cake batter. What we do know from academic research is it actually affects your liking. So you like it less when you have incongruency. So the question we end up asking a lot to sort of combine this idea of marketing and R&D is, does the product actually meet the promise that is made in marketing? So understanding the product experience is really key to creating an experiential relationship that is authentic, right? So this brings us back to memes and how do I know that it means something to me? And you've probably seen something like this. You can see this image and it says, I can hear this image and I can also feel this image. You know what it sounds like and you know what it feels like when it hits you on the face. And I think that that's actually really powerful. This idea that, there are sensory signatures that are nostalgic and they signal something to you emotionally, which is important, but also signal something sensorially. So just through an image, you have what's called a cross-modal association. The vision is now signaling a sound. You can hear it. And there are some brands that are already using this to their advantage. And so this is kind of an example of like a sensory meme that Lay's does a really good job. If you haven't seen some of this, maybe I just see it because I saw one and the algorithm's working for me now. But so you have these fake flavors that are coming out in a way that's called design fiction. And it's actually a really great way of testing whether or not perhaps a new flavor or a new product could succeed pretty well. And there's lots of ways that you could do this. You could do this with combining something like the sensory profiling information that you're getting from your R&D and from your sensory teams. But you can also feed it into ChatGPT and get a full description of potentially new flavors. You could create a sensory meme that you can test wild in the market, using Stable Diffusion or DALL-E, and really see what happens there. And I'm going to pass this off to Allison to give you a little bit of a taste of something that, we did as a case study within this.
Yeah, so we wanted to pull together this idea of something that was able to go viral, right? A memetic, with also meeting the consumers where they are. So truly going back to Michelle's idea, like raise of hands, how many of us when we're watching TV immediately pick up our phones once commercials come on, right? Yeah, all of us. I think every single person raised their hand. So the idea is really taking these innovations, these moments, and seeing how are they actually going to perform in the wild, for lack of a better term. And we want to meet consumers where they are. So this idea of design fiction is really, really interesting. As we said, we are not really a traditional company. We use a lot of neuroscientific, behavioral, psychological types of measurements that we can gather in previous exploratory phases and feed into something like an AI system to come up with new product innovations or new concepts or whatever it might be. And what we do is we create these different ideas that are derived from different types of behavioral and psychological and physiological information. And we want to see, well, what is going to have that best chance of life? What is going to create that moment, that viral meme, that thing that's going to really drive behavior, and then invest more in that. So this design fiction approach that we take is using a closed mock social media feed. And we are using the speculative innovations to ultimately test it in a couple different ways. So we'll use our traditional communication metrics. So it might be brand recall, it might be interest, call to action. But we want to go beyond that, right? Because truthfully, that doesn't really mean much to us. We want to know behaviorally, how are they experiencing it, right? Did they share it? Did they like it? Did they comment on it? But you could be like me and I'm simply a scroller. I'm not going to interact with anything. How long was it on my screen? Did I pause? Did I scroll right by it? Was I visually paying attention? Was I paying visual attention to it? We can use something like eye tracking. We can potentially be using different types of physiological measures to understand that experience further. In the idea of brand harmony as well, how well does this concept or innovation or moment fit with my brand signature? Is it in line, or am I going to be alienating my loyal consumer base because of that? So overall, this kind of idea that we have here is crossing that bridge that often is formed between R&D and marketing to really try to bring everyone together. Meeting the consumers where they are in the environment that they are is really important when we're thinking about kind of chasing that right white rabbit, as Michelle said. So really, what is the next thing? How are we going to grasp our attention when we know that it's probably the most challenging thing to do? So
Yeah, and I would argue that if you do have a digitalization team, that I think more and more often people are including sensory people on digitalization teams. In particular, this is happening at a lot of consumer product company type of brands. And I think that's a really great resource. So if you don't have a sensory person working on your brand, that it's maybe something you should really start to incorporate. There we go. So if you'd like to reach out, you can. But thank you, everybody, for coming. I know it's not exactly the same.
Questions for Michelle and Allison?
So great job. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, when you were talking early on about one of the clients just being trying to limit social media during the Olympics, was that specific because they didn't want spoilers?
It was kind of a mix. Yes. So I think in having people release spoilers would mean that they wouldn't necessarily need to watch the live event.
Gotcha.
So that was detracting from live viewing.
Similarly, in Olympics past, being concerned about watching live versus programming,
Yeah.
just constraining distribution
Yeah.
has been another tactic too. And I feel like the World Cup and other
Yeah.
places have good examples of doing a good job of it.
Exactly. I think that it's kind of, thinking forward into what people are actually doing and how they're interacting and thinking about the psychology around, how, like what's important to them about the Olympics. It really is that conversation that you're able to have with people, that bonding you're able to have over sports, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle and Allison. If there are no other questions, then we thank you all for coming to this session.